Welcome everyone to a session on tech-enabled health solutions and patient outcomes. My name is David Kasich. I'm the editor of a publication called MedTech Strategist that serves the medical device industry. And we're fortunate today to have with us Terry Sanders, Senior Vice President, Enterprise Marketing and Communication at HIMSS, and Ivan Tornos, Group President, Orthopedics at Zimmer Biomet. Thank you both. Thanks to both of you. So Terry, let me begin with you. I think it's fair to say that digital technologies have brought a revolution to so many aspects of our lives today, but healthcare and medicine are different. When you hear the term the digital revolution in healthcare, does that seem appropriate? Does it seem too strong a term? Does it seem insufficient? And what is that revolution all about? What does it entail?
Yeah, David, that's a great question. So when I sit and think about it, it's almost, yes, we are in a digital health revolution, but it's also in jeopardy. So we're on the precipice at a moment where we really have an opportunity to truly progress down a new technology forward, consumer-driven path. So while technology has been central to the advancement of other industries, its uptick in healthcare is still relatively new in comparison. We've been talking about it and pushing for this for decades. And what we saw in the pandemic was that it brought about one of the largest and most exciting shifts we've seen in the digital health space since the entrance of non-traditional healthcare providers or the disruptors. So the system had to adapt very, very quickly, and doctors and consumers really rose to the challenge. We saw huge increases in adoption of consumer devices, wearables, and in telehealth particularly. With the number of Medicare beneficiaries, I think that's just, this statistic is just so telling of the opportunity. Before the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services were given the authority by Congress to lift longstanding restrictions, the number of telehealth cases in the Medicare community were 15,000. We saw those rise to 24 million in just a few months during the pandemic. So we're standing on the precipice of a major opportunity. The waivers that we saw and the shift that we saw during the pandemic that are pushing us further down the path of a true digital revolution are temporary.
Ivan, Terry spoke in her thing, mentioned that this is this digital revolution is relatively new phenomenon in healthcare. And I think that's particularly true in the medtech space, where we've really only seen the emergence of digital technologies in the last, say, half dozen years. I know it's an important part of Zimmer's vision going forward, but I wonder if you can just describe for us how Zimmer's thinking about the digital revolution, what it entails, and how it's shaping how Zimmer is approaching things going forward.
Absolutely. Sure, David, and great to see you again. I'm not sure that I would call it an evolution or a revolution anymore. I would say that it's a very fast evolution. I would say that, as you mentioned, over the last 8 to 10 years, digital technologies, platforms, anything from smartphones, apps to wearables have become part of medtech. Frankly, these technologies have been deeply entrenched in every aspect of our daily living. I got 3 kids under the age of 10, and I can tell you they can't live without all these technologies. And now in the healthcare space, they're just accelerating their utilization. We use these platforms to manage anything and everything about our health and well-being. So not telling you anything that you don't know, and you know Zimmer Biomet very well. Over the last 5 to 6 years, as we saw the adoption and integration of these digital health technologies, and frankly, in orthopedics we're late, but as we saw them soar, we realized that for us at Zimmer Biomet to be the best and the boldest medtech company globally, which by the way is the vision of Zimmer Biomet, we needed to adopt a technology-first approach to innovation and R&D, research and development. And that's with the needs and inputs of both the healthcare provider as well as the patient in mind. It's no longer just the physician. We got to expand the ecosystem of customers. We got to think healthcare providers across the globe, as well as the patient who wants to get more and more educated here. So simply put, for us to achieve leadership in the space, the product alone is not going to solve it. We can't be just a great product company, which we have been for 97 years, manufacturing and commercializing hips and knees. We got to do more than that. So as we look through the lens of a person, let's say with chronic joint pain, somebody with knee or hip pain as an example, we saw that the journey really didn't start or ended, for that matter, in the surgical room, in the operating room. So for us to have a meaningful impact on this patient and their outcomes, we need to utilize what we call cutting-edge technology to create a connected experience between that patient, that provider at the hospital, throughout the entire episode of care.
Can you describe the program? When we think about medical device companies coming together with digital technology companies, MyMobility seems to be a great example. So can you just describe for us what MyMobility is, what Zimmer gets out of it, why Zimmer is doing it, and what Apple gets out of it?
MyMobility is a platform, a patient care platform that we designed in collaboration with Apple. I don't think it gets any more exciting than partnering with Apple to build something that impacts patients' lives. So 3 years ago, we developed what is a connected ecosystem between the Apple Watch and the iPhone. And through this unique and proprietary tool, we're able to track all kinds of data on the patient across the entire episode of care. So I give you a watch that is connected to the MyMobility app, and 100 days before surgery, you're already providing data on you, David, to your care team. Anything from how your knees or hips function, to your biometrics, how much exercise you do, what are your expectations, what is your lifestyle. All of that data is getting fed through the watch to the care team. And 45 days before the surgery happens, actually gets much more intense. By the time that you, David, arrive to the surgery, we know more about you and how your body and your motion works than you do. Then, if you choose to do a robotic procedure, now you get the data from MyMobility, all the points that we collected through the watch and the application getting fed to the robot. The robot and obviously the physician know where to cut, how much bone to spare, and given your lifestyle, what is the best way, what is the best implant, what is the best way to do a technique, and what is the best implant to get in you. And after that, once you get sutured back up, you leave with your watch and your app, but the journey is not over. We continue to track how compliant you are with your physical therapy. You don't need to have physical therapy if you don't want to with an actual physical therapist. You can do it remotely. So I can go on and on. As you can sense, I'm very excited about this platform, but I will tell you, simplifying everything, that mobility is like having really your care management team on your wrist.
So Terry, let me bring you in here. I don't know whether you're familiar with MyMobility as a specific program, but I wonder to what degree it resonates with you. And I would add, as a kind of parenthetical setup for the question, 20 years ago, what orthopedic companies like Zimmer do was certainly very important part of the healthcare ecosystem, but a small, narrow part. I think the vision that Yvonne is articulating is much more inclusive, much more engaged with the broader constituents that you have. And so I wonder where you think a program like MyMobility fits in your vision of the digital revolution.
What's great about programs like MyMobility is that it's pushing the shift towards value over volume. We're moving ourselves away from that conversation. So years ago, I worked a lot with provider associations and building these quality clinical programs that follow similar guidelines and philosophies and methodologies like MyMobility. And you're right, one of the major pushbacks that people would offer when you try to push those programs forward, at least back in the past, had been, was there an appetite? I think we talked about earlier, when we saw the shift last year, the shift from 15,000 to 24 million, in a Medicare population, right, where we know age correlation also can limit the use of technology. Individuals of all ages show a very clear willingness to leverage telehealth, leverage digital health in a variety of circumstances for their own care delivery.
So you raised some very interesting questions that I think if we had more time, we could expand on, most notably around the consumerization of healthcare and telehealth and the kind of revolution, as you say, once we're past this pandemic, how lasting something like telehealth. And I think it raises questions. What kind of data are we talking about? And how do we make sure that it's helpful and practical and not overwhelming or simply ignored by physicians who, are up to their elbows in gore replacing a total joint, total hip
That's
joint.
where we help our providers, right? And that's technology also plays a role there as well, taking data and turning it into information, actionable information. So HIMSS and the Personal Connected Health Alliance have long been working on this. They actually have created the Continua Design Guidelines. It's the only framework that's ever been developed for true interoperability. So systems are talking to each other. We're shutting down some of those barriers, right? So that there's access to information, that the information, we have our e-charts, we have my chart. But what happens with that data? How is it being analyzed, right? And how is that being turned into action for the providers? We have opportunities to help them. They shouldn't have to necessarily manage everything from A to Z. There's an opportunity for technology to come in and make this easier, more manageable for them, accessible to them, but also accessible to the consumer, who that ultimately the data is their personal health information.
Again, in past conversations, you've used the term in informatics rather than end-to-end informatics. What do you mean? What does this data flow mean for a company like Zimmer? And certainly, if you look at where the whole robotics technology space has moved over the last decade, it has been toward not so much more sophisticated robots, but a more sophisticated use of information, advanced learning, machine learning, artificial intelligence, or maybe augmented intelligence, better phrase. So how are you viewing this informatics play?
Yeah, absolutely, David. And thank you, by the way, for remembering the term in-to-in. I remember that exchange you and I had a few months ago.
It stuck with me.
The reason why I came with the in-to-in versus end-to-end is because when I talk about this whole episode of care discussion and the fact that we integrate data and robotics and implants, people tend to think that this is some sort of a bundle, some sort of a category play. It's not. We're not putting a bunch of gadgets together. We are interconnecting all of those gadgets, and those gadgets truly do become an ecosystem, and they really do have that dependency, that in-to-in. The data from my mobility is going into the robot. That data from the actual metal, from the actual implant that is going to stay with the patient for life, continues to feed data to a platform that continues to inform the caregiver in terms of how the patient is recovering. So when I talk about in-to-in, I truly mean it. Data is getting fed from one component to the other. Now, I'd like to elaborate on a question that you asked to Terry, which
sure.
I thought was a great question in terms of the quantity of data. Does it matter to have all this data? You got surgeons, as you said very well, that are extremely busy. Are they going to be consuming all kinds of data? And the short answer is that they will, if it is solving meaningful problems. And I will tell you, in orthopedics today, there are 3 or 4 key problems that we're trying to solve through data. First, for the patient, you want to make sure that the patient has the absolute best clinical outcome. Going back to Susan or Jake or Mary, living in pain because she or he cannot walk with a knee or a hip, what is she going to do with that data? By collecting data on me and understanding me, I can tell my caregiver what is the best implant that I can have. In these days with COVID, that data is also preparing you how to avoid an infection the day of the surgery. Before COVID, it was telling you also when is the best time to have the surgery. So there's all kinds of problems that data solves for that patient by educating the patient. Now let's move to the physician. That's the physician, that's the doctor that has been doing this for 30 years or 20 years. As this gentleman that you mentioned, does he need the data? Well, absolutely, because the data can teach that physician how to shorten the actual surgery. A surgery that I used to do in 50 minutes, now I can do it in 30 minutes. And that matters to me because every year you carry my reimbursement, CMS, and every year I got more volume. We're all getting older, we're all getting heavier. So now I can use the data to know that need that I was doing in 50 minutes, I can do it in 30 minutes. And by having data on the patient, I already know which type of implant, what kind of cut, what technique, and a bunch of other things, which, by the way, I can be discussing real time with the robot that is doing the surgery. So in-to-in, we got data across the entire episode of care, and all the different gadgets talk to one another. And the volume, as we're talking earlier, is not what matters, it's the value of the data. And if we're solving those 3, 4 problems that are articulated, this is here to stay. And I will tell you, we're moving really fast.
Well, I will say, if it happens in orthopedics, then we know it's real. So let me wrap up with one question. And that is, we've talked both about how new this revolution is, but also how potentially impactful it is, not to use the word impactful, but how meaningful it could be. Quick question. How far along on the trajectory to this revolution are we? And how many years will it take to get to a fully realized digital revolution, whether we're thinking about it in terms of the healthcare provider world or whether we're thinking about it in terms of the medical device world? Terry, let me start with you, and then Yvonne will get the final word here.
I would love to see us make that shift in 2 to 3 years, where we could actually say we have done it. I don't know if that's feasible, but I'm hoping that what we've seen with the pandemic gives us enough proof points. We know that there's appetite. We know that the providers are on board. We know that consumers are on board. I'm hoping that we will be able to leverage this to make that shift come much, much sooner. I won't say how long ago it was. I was in the School of Public Health, but I mean, we have truly been talking about these concepts for a very, very long time. And technology is advancing at light speed.
Great. So Yvonne, I'm going to ask you to wrap up by answering the same question. I'm also going to note that you and I have had this discussion before. So I'm going to see if you're going to give me the same answer now that you gave me before. How far along are we? How long is it going to take? And I would point out that digital and robotics are not exactly the same, but we've had robotic capability for 20 plus years. And broadly speaking, we're still single-digit penetrations of robotic surgery. So this whole notion of great capabilities, but a kind of conservative approach is real. Although I suspect that around knee surgery in particular, robotics is probably accelerating faster than just general.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to answer your question, David, by quoting you from 5 minutes ago. You said if it is happening in orthopedics, it can happen anywhere. And again, you know this space very well. You know, orthopedic surgeons are creatures of habit. They've been doing the same knees with the same protocols, with the same tools, with the same implants, quite frankly, for the last 30 years. So if it is happening in orthopedics, and by the way, it's really happening quickly, it will happen everywhere. So the opportunity is limitless, it's moving fast, and it's going to continue to advance. Now, the question you asked Terry, and you're asking me as well, you know, what are the limitations? I would say there are 3 buckets of limitations. And again, those limitations are getting resolved. The first one are legal. The second one is cultural. And then the third one is value. And I'm going to touch briefly on all 3 of them. Legal, obviously, we're dealing with patients. You got all kinds of regulations, HIPAA and whatnot. We got to make sure we understand who owns the data, who has access to the data, and how we use the data moving forward. And again, that problem is getting solved. Clearly, it is the patient who owns the data, along with the provider, the caregiver with the consent. That leaves you in the second bucket of limitations, which is culture. And as I just alluded, you know, orthopedic surgeons are creatures of habit. They don't want to get involved, rethink how they do the surgery. It's a high volume business. It's a very repetitive surgery. The only way that a surgeon is going to adopt this data approach, this technology and digital, which it is different as you mentioned, the only way they're going to use it is if enables the way they do surgeries, accelerates the way they do surgeries, drives efficiency. So it's incorporating these tools into their current standard of care, their algorithm of practice. The key word is enabling versus replacing. The moment we can teach that surgeon that has been doing surgeries for 30 years that this is an add-on versus a replacement, she or he is going to embrace the new technologies, and that is also happening. And in the third bucket is where Zimmer Biomet is leading the revolution by doing randomized clinical trials, by partnering across the entire episode of care, by integrating CEOs of hospitals like HSS here in New York, in demonstrating that this is something that is valuable, is concrete, is going to deliver outcomes that were not seen before. It's happening in orthopedics. I know you've been waiting for a while. It's happening quickly, and it's here to stay. The opportunity is frankly limitless.
Great, thank you so much. This has been a fascinating discussion. I know we could carry it on much, much longer, and I suspect in different venues and in different ways, this discussion will continue. Terry, thank you so much for
Thanks,
sacrificing your time and coming today. Ivana, it's always great speaking with you, and thanks again for your participation.
Thank you, guys.
Much,
Thank you,
David.
Terry.
Thanks, Ivana.